Okay, I wanted to talk now about miracles in the Bible. The main purpose of miracles within the Bible is to validate the message of the miracle worker. It is common to hear that other miracles performed by adherents of other religions besides Christianity would cancel out miracle claims of New Testament of Christians in the New Testament that perform miracles. But we need to be careful here. Within theistic religions, we have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That is pretty much it. There are miracle stories in the Old Testament, and Christians have no problem with those. Muhammad claimed no miracles other than the Quran itself. We saw before that theism is the only game in town, rationally speaking. We now see that Christianity is the only game in town when it comes to miracles. Now, just because there are accounts of miracles within the Bible, that does not, all by itself, mean the miracles in fact occurred. But it is important to see at this point that the miracle accounts are intended to increase our faith in the message of the prophets and the apostles, the authors of the Bible. That is the primary function of miracles. That is the primary function miracles, or putative miracles, serve. Sometimes, when a person skeptical of, and perhaps even hostile towards Christianity, is asked what it would take for them to believe in Jesus, they will respond by saying they would believe if they saw a miracle. Suppose such a skeptic had a videotape of the resurrection of Jesus, for example. That should do the trick. He or she would no doubt have it analyzed to see if it had been faked, of course, but suppose it came through with flying colors, and there were, video tapes and camcorders back in those days, and they survived until the present. In that case, we should have a convert. Okay, so video recordings were obviously not available in biblical times. The next best thing was a written record of an eyewitness testimony. Of course, it is possible for an eyewitness to be mistaken. Likewise, it is possible for an author of a writing to lie. But if we have a bona fide eyewitness who is neither mistaken nor lying, then we can trust what we are reading. Do we have such a testimony in the Bible? It is hard to say with irresistible, rational certainty, but we can make a good historical case in the affirmative. There is no reason I am aware of to conclude a priori that the authors of the Bible were intentionally lying. And we would prima facie expect them to tell the truth, for in many places in the Bible we see lying condemned even under penalty of death. Are all 40 authors or however many that there were, it's more than 40 I think, but about 40 authors, were they all complete hypocrites? It is possible, but we would not expect this. Also, some people within the Bible ended up dying or suffering persecution for their claims. The prophet Jeremiah comes to mind in this regard. Paul both suffered persecution and death for his claims of what he claimed to be true. Moreover, there is extrinsic evidence that the authors were truthful, for there are parts of the Bible we have independent historical attestation for. The wall I mentioned elsewhere, for example. Moreover, there is the test of embarrassment. When a person is recounting something that happened to them, they sometimes shall stretch the truth a bit, or at least not give all the facts. Yet in the Bible we see people writing embarrassing facts about themselves. We would not expect the Pharaoh around the time of the Exodus to keep detailed records of the 10 plagues leading up to the Exodus. Yet we find Moses, the author of the Exodus story, openly admitting he was not allowed to enter the promised land because of disobedience on his part. Paul practically brags in the New Testament how much he persecuted Christians before he became a Christian himself. So embarrassing admissions, we tend to think, are not lies. And the biblical authors do this. Also, in the case of the Gospels, we have multiple attestation to the same events. It is hard to appreciate this because there are so many claims of contradictions occurring between the Gospels. But this is an uninformed opinion, I think. For example, even the scholars of the Jesus Seminar admit that there was a man named Jesus, and he was baptized by another man named John the Baptist. These people are certainly not inerrantists, but they do accept this basic fact in the life of the historical Jesus because all four Gospels record it. So when four different people are independently saying essentially the same thing, we tend to believe them. Finally, if the authors are generally reliable when it comes to non-supernatural events, and I talk about this elsewhere, then there is no reason to arbitrarily reject their miraculous testimony. For all these reasons, we can be reasonably certain that the authors are not intentionally lying to us in describing various miracles. Might they have been mistaken? Well, I do not think this is plausible. The main miracles in the Old Testament focus on the Exodus, and in the New Testament the main miracles focus on Jesus. In both cases, there were hundreds of witnesses according to the biblical account, which is generally reliable, remember. Could so many people be wrong? I suppose it is within the realm of possibility, but it is less plausible to my mind than the alternative. People in biblical times were not complete idiots. There were liars and hucksters in those days, and people did sometimes misinterpret things in their environments. But with so many specific things that could only have been caused by God, and that interconnect with one another, it seems that God really was active there. Now, is there any reason we would not accept their testimony with respect to miracles as more or less accurate? I can only think of two. First, we arbitrarily declare, by fiat, that history cannot or does not include room for the supernatural. But we want to follow the evidence where it leads, so this is an unwise tack. The second reason we may want to reject their claim is that we have read David Hume and think miracles are impossible. Let's digress for a moment and address Hume briefly. As I understand Hume, he was not saying miracles are impossible, but that our knowledge of miracles, based on the testimony of others, is never justifiable. But why? If we have sufficient evidence, then we are justified in concluding that a particular event was a miracle. It seems that Hume's epistemic problem with miracles is based on a misunderstanding of both miracles and science. Dr. Manhattan, in the Watchmen movie and comics, by the way, has the same misunderstanding. The laws of nature are a description of how the natural order works when left to itself. If there is a God, and if he intervenes into the natural order, then the natural order is not left to itself. This is the whole point of miracles to begin with. So a law of nature is not necessarily absolute. I think that even atheist scientists today deny that the laws of nature are absolute anyhow. And a miracle is not a violation of the laws of nature. Which that's how Hume defines it. But here's the main problem with Hume. If probability is based on background information, if the background information changes, then so does the probability. When Hume says that the probability of a miracle occurring is always going to be less than the trustworthiness of the eyewitness, that is based on the background information. If that background information includes that God exists and has explicitly stated he will do a miracle, say in the Bible, then the probability of a miracle occurring is 1, or certain. If somebody views that miracle, then relates it to us, we can certainly believe them. We see in the end that Hume's apprehensions aren't the way to go. To sum up, there are multiple reasons for believing the miracle accounts in the Bible, and only 2 reasons for rejecting them, which themselves ought to be rejected. So the claims of Hume and the anti-supernatural bias, we should reject, and those are the only 2 reasons for accepting miracles. But the purpose of miracles, you'll recall, is to establish the message of the messenger of God. Therefore, we may legitimately infer that the authors of the Bible are accurately speaking for and of God, and this speech is more specific than what we find in general revelation alone. Next, we'll look at prophecy in the Bible. Thank you.